Good evening, model railroaders, and welcome back to the Second Section podcast, where it's just a bunch of guys talking about model railroading. I'm your host, Andy Dorsch, and joining me this evening is my co-host, Mike Ostertag. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Look, we match.
We match. We have matching shirts.
Yeah, we
Yes,
match.
we have matching shirts.
That wasn't
Hey,
even planned either, was it?
no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It wasn't planned at all.
No.
Um, So our guest this evening is Lance Mindheim. So
Never heard of him.
never heard of him.
No.
Uh, he writes books. He
Really?
writes books. Yeah,
Oh.
I've seen his books and
What- You
he's
mean like kind of like this one?
yes, exactly like that one.
Oh.
So
This is
That
that
looks
Lance
familiar.
Mindheim. Yeah, this is
yes.
that Lance Mindheim.
So I want everyone here in the section crew this evening to give Lance a warm welcome. And Lance, for those who in our audience who don't know who you are, would you care to give us a little introduction about yourself and your model railroading interests and what you like to do in this great hobby of model railroading?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, guys. It's kind of funny that all of a sudden, the 15 minutes prior to the lead up, we have to really dress ourselves. Once that light comes on and things go live, all of a sudden we become professional. The tone of the for people listening, the tone of the conversation now is much different than it was 5 minutes ago.
It always is.
But we
see,
gotta
that's
keep.
just it. It's just the first 30 seconds. So we're past that now, so we can say what we want.
Yeah.
No, so welcome, Lance.
Thanks.
But yeah, why don't you go ahead and maybe give a brief background of a couple of the I guess areas that you like to focus on in mile railroading. I know that you have some business and some web presence tied to that. So go ahead, take all the time and introduce yourself to the section crew here this evening.
Well, I think like a lot of people, it goes way back in time where, the bug bit me. And my theory is that model building is really something that's in a person's DNA. And that's why I really don't think it's going to die out. I mean, everybody says, oh, with the internet or the demise of steam. But I think that if, we all have this genetic code that draws us to this great hobby. I don't see that dying off, but I've been interested in miniatures since I was a little kid. And then it was just, I guess like a lot of people, I was a teenager and walked into a hobby store and saw the magazines, and it was just like a switch went off, and I was, the bug bit me, and I was overseas at the time, and then came back, and I found out that, to my surprise, my buddy was into it too, and he had somehow finagled himself into the Indiana University Model Railroad Club, which was open to anybody. So that's, when you're 16, that's heaven to be around all the college guys. And
Yeah, right.
they taught me everything in terms of photography. And I still keep in touch with these guys. Lon Udaly was a friend of mine in the club, and we took road trips, and his brother is Kevin Udaly.
Really?
Who owns White River.
That name is very familiar. Yeah, owner of White River. Yeah.
So that's, but yeah, I kind of took a traditional path. I think, in the early years, to put it kindly, I was a pretty crappy modeler. But I think everybody is. I mean, you have to start out when you're 16, 17, 18. You're not going to be Mike Confalone, and if nothing else, I stuck with it. College hit, and I really kind of stepped away from the hobby, and I was in my late 20s or 30s, and for no reason whatsoever, I just became interested again and continued to build really shitty layouts, one right after another. I mean, they were really ugly looking. And then at that point, I'm married at this point, and we have a guest room, but it had to be used as an office also. So I had to brilliant idea that if I kept it at eye level, then we could, serve two purposes. And, like a lot of newcomers, you have these great ideas you think nobody thought of, and the reason nobody thought of them is they're terrible ideas. But, being at eye level was just, it was unworkable, but it started to look a little bit better. And so I took some snapshots. I sent it off to Model Railroader, and Jeff Wilson, who was my editor at the time, it still is my editor. He edits the books I do. Sent me a note back and said, we're interested in doing an article on this layout, but being the diplomat he was, it's like, your photos really suck. So can you? But he didn't say it that way. Jeff would never say it that way, but that was the basic gist of it. So he said, can you go? We're interested in the article, but can you reshoot it? So I took more pictures and sent them up, and he comes back and said that it's pretty clear that you're just beyond hope on the photography side. This isn't going to work. So there's this guy named Paul Dokos. And I said, God, that rings a bell. Why does that name sound so familiar? So they said, we're going to send him out. We're sick of dealing with your shots. So we're going to send him out to photograph it. And so Paul came out and he took the photos, and it made it in Model Railroader. And then he got me into a crew, Marty McGurk, who you just had on recently, Paul, Bernie Kopensky, that whole group. And once you get into an environment of really good modelers, it can really help you put things together. And being around those guys, things started to click, and I finally understood how to build a model. So did an N-scale moment layout, which we have a picture of. We can go do that later.
Okay.
Made the mistake of, I think a lot of people do, is that 20 by 20 in N-scale is like 40 by 40 in HO. The thing was just so big. It was just too much to deal with.
Sure.
And then moved on to the Miami layouts, which I still have. At that point, I was in the financial services business, and at the 17, 18 year mark, they will give you a buyout. It's not enough to retire on, but it's a little bit to give you a boost. And at that point, I was getting pretty burned out on it.
Sure.
And there was an article on custom model railroad builders in Model Railroader, and I said, that might be kind of the way I want to go, but it sounds pretty risky. So I started the custom layout business 2 years before I retired from financial services, and was doing them both at the same time, which was a handful. But things just kind of took off from there. Had a mentor named Ross Allen who had a company called RailServe in Florida. He was so generous. I don't know what I was thinking, but I started sending him these emails and asking about the business, and he emails me back, says, "Who are you and what the hell are you asking all these questions for?" And so basically I said, "Oh, I want to be your competitor." It's
really?
And, so anyway, he goes, "Oh, well, you should have told me." He goes, because he was looking to retire at that point in time. So he and I became really great friends, and he was a real mentor for me. And we had a big project we were bidding on together. He won it, which was fine. And then before we could start on, I got a call from his wife and said, "Sorry, Lance, Ross died last night." It was just, had a sudden heart attack, and he was gone. And she, his wife, Gail, who's still in the hobby, said, "I'm looking to retire too. I don't want this job. Just take it." And it was a pretty big project. So early on, I got kind of a big jump start in the hobby through this big project. Very sad to get it that way. I mean, he was such a great mentor.
Sure.
Really, Ross was a funny guy. I mean, he was just a wise soul. And I was so naive at that point in time. And he said, "Let me explain to you this concept called the general public." I was like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And he said, "Well," he goes, when you think about your orbit and the people some consciously you pick these people because they're high character, you like them, they're good, decent people, and your problem is you think the whole world is like that. He goes, you are leaving that realm when you put your name out there. And even in financial services, you pick your clients. I mean, you have to get along with each other. And he said, well, when you put your shingle out, you are now out there with the general public, and you better batten down your hatches because you will see everything. and he was right. So that's kind of been my entree into business. It's hard to believe it's been 23 years, but it's been a fun ride. So that's kind of that's the journey.
So you have been building model railroad layouts for 23 years professionally?
Yep, it's hard to believe that. Yeah.
So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Lance, you have a couple of web pages out there, and I'm gonna pull those up on screen. So you have, let's see here, custom model railroad builders. Let's see, is it this one? If you guys can see that, this is shelflayouts.com. This is your business page, correct?
That's the business page.
Yes. So down here, it looks like you have quite a few services available. So you do construction, design, consulting, and looks like some books as well. And you have
that's pretty much.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the bulk of what I do is the construction. I do the design is ongoing. Consulting occasionally. That was kind of through a client request where people have their own design and they ask my opinion, and I write back and I say, I don't really think you want it. And they said, oh yeah. So the way the consulting contract works is there is no back and forth. You pay me and you're going to get my unvarnished opinion, and that's why you pay so much less than the design, because there's no debate. It just take it as you wish. And I had one guy said, I totally disagree with everything you said. I want to hire you again. And then he gave another.
And tell it to me different this time. And looks like you have a blog associated to this as well, where you discuss your builds, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah, that's. I have two sites. Since we're all friends here, the business site is where I have to behave myself and act professionally, and then on my personal site, I just say whatever the heck I want, and hopefully the business customers personal blogs.
So your personal one is the lancemindheim1.com, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so
Lance, do you find people when they're contracting with you to build a layout, do you find that over time people have gone to more of a linear style of construction with their layouts, or are they kind of whatever fits the room, or what's the most common practice that you have for construction right now with the design and construction and layouts for people?
It is more the linear, and this is something that goes back to I've been in business for myself for 40 or 45 years now. Not everybody is a fit for a customer, and it is too risky to take on a project that I have reservations about. So the bowl of spaghettis and those types, I just say you have to talk to somebody else. So the ones I take are primarily of the format that you see that you're on the screen now. They're more linear around the walls. And it's not that much of a battle. I mean, I think most people see that the advantages of going with that approach.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting a lot of comments from the section crew here tonight. So, Tom Klamoski says, Lance has two great websites, lots of excellent information on both. And let's see, talking about the blog and how it's helped others. Humanity Junction says, as much as I did not want it, the opinion really helped me. And Santa Ana Industrial Lead, his blog is
That's
priceless.
Ken. I
There's
just
so
talked to Ken is
Yeah.
a Santa Ana Industrial Lead. I just emailed him a couple hours ago. He's a good modeler too.
Yeah.
We were just talking.
Then he's is a regular here on the section crew. So Derek Alexander, please post the websites. They are in the show notes this evening. I did get them out there, and so you can check them there. I'll try, as we talk about Lance and the topics this evening, I'll get those into the chat as well. So look for them there as well. Boomer Diorama says the argument for model railroading is art. Lance is the argument for model railroading as art. That's kind words, Boomer. You're no slouch yourself. So
Yeah, really.
I tell Boomer, I was just watching his video before the show. I mean, Boomer does great work. I was just half an hour ago.
It's incredible.
His latest video, or
I was just scrolling through them.
Oh,
yeah. So that was a fairly good introduction and primer for this evening, and almost a segue of bits into our topic of discussion. So I do want to turn to the section crew real quickly here this evening. So if you have questions for Lance or any of the topics that we're going to discuss this evening, please get them in the chat. Remember, let's keep it about modeling centric, keep it PC. We do have moderators in the chat. They're the folks with the little blue wrench next to their name. If you get unruly, they're gonna boot you out of here. So make sure we're all on minding our P's and Q's this evening, but also having a good
except
time.
Except for the three of us, right?
Yeah, right. We get carte blanche on whatever we want to do. So but anyhow, so let's get right into the meat and potatoes of the discussion this evening. So I think the title of the video this evening was talking about how can we take ourselves from average modeling to exceptional modeling. And you talked about it earlier on that a lot of the layouts that you built early and the models that you built, they weren't of very good quality. I'll put it politely. You said they're crap. So
I should have had some pictures of those, but sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's quite all right. So so I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of talk about those topics, and then as we wind around the river of this evening's discussion, we'll go where the flow takes us. So
I got a good question for him right away.
Oh, good.
Sure.
I think this is a great question, personally, because I thought of it. But all right. We've all been there. We've all had, I mean, I'm still there. I'm still working on trying to develop my first real layout that I'm actually going to be proud of actually showing people. And I'm pretty well on my way to that. But with all these layouts that you've built, the personal layouts, even the crappy ones, what are some of the biggest takeaways you had from building the bad layouts to where you're at now? And is there anything from those bad layouts that you still kind of in the back of your mind say, that's actually not that bad of an idea if I tweak it just a little bit? Is there anything kind of like that kind of has flowed right along with your entire career as building layouts like that?
No.
Okay.
Good one.
All
Good
right.
question, Mike.
All right.
But I'm gonna answer your question. There is a takeaway. Is if I were to give one piece of advice to anybody, it is to get engaged and start building stuff, because I would not be able to do what I'm doing now had I not built those previous layouts. And, you know, spending all your time on the forums, debating minutia with other modelers is not going to make you better. The one piece of advice I would give to anybody is build something. And, you know, I don't know who's out, you know, the age of the people watching, but I would say your average 16 or 17-year-old, if you're watching, that's where we all were, is now is the time, you know, to jump in, start making your mistakes, and just don't get in a situation where 20, 30, 40 years of your life go by and you haven't started. So, you know, I've got friends that are active duty military, a lot of them. You can always do something. So the takeaway would be, you just need to be in the game. And the longer you do it, the chances improve that you will get better. But you have to want to. And that's, this whole psychology of this is fascinating to me. And I'll give you an analogy. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to. I'm a runner. I think a better word would be I'm a jogger, and I'm pretty damn slow. I enjoy it. I don't care. I don't want to get better. I'm average. I go out and I do it. It serves a purpose. It works off my beer. You know, I get to see the birds as I'm sitting there, as I'm running down the trail. So I enjoy it, and it's recreation. But I have no interest in getting any faster or better at it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And every individual, I tell people to be selfish. Nobody really cares. They may be polite, but nobody really cares what's in your base. Your relatives know what, they may be polite, but you need to be selfish. The one person that really matters is yourself in terms of how much educational value are you getting out of it. And it's a very personal decision how far you want to take it. If you say, you know, I'm spending X amount of weeks, you know, I've got a decent representation, I'm having fun, I've got a lot of good friendships. There's no compelling reason to push yourself. There really isn't. It's really a personal decision, and the only reason you should try to do it having any kind of competitive reason for doing that is not a good idea. If it's something that you get fulfillment and satisfaction out of, that would really be the only reason to improve your results. And so getting back, you can spend decades in the hobby and you're not going to get better if you're not trying to. And the way that you do that is you look at your past results and you pat yourself on the back and say, given where I was at age 28 or 30, that was the best I do and I was in the game. And then I'll go back and say, these are areas that I can improve. I don't beat myself up on it. I said, I had a good time. I learned a lot. Now on the next one, I'm going to try to get incrementally better. And it's interesting, if you look at the really good modelers, they do it their whole life. I think you said you had Tom Johnson on, Andy?
Yeah, we've had Tom Johnson on. That's right. He's here tonight. He's in the, I saw him in the show.
I'm just going to say this, and we'll come back to it later. Another Flight Radar 24 guy. But anyway, not to get down that rabbit. But Tom was always somebody I looked up to, and for some reason a year or two went by and I hadn't really seen his work, and then I saw it again and it's like, geez, he's still getting better. So here's somebody that has been a modeler all his life. An argument can be made he's one of the best ones out there, and yet he still gets better year to year to year. So it's just an ongoing journey. So this whole subject of getting better should only be for selfish reasons. If you're trying to impress your friends, that's not a good reason. I'm not a real big believer in contests or certificates. It's a situation where if you're getting enjoyment and you think you would enjoy it more if it looked better, then go for it. If you don't care, then just enjoy where you are now.
Right.
There is no should in terms of improving your skills.
Yeah, that is the
That's like some awesome. That's an
that is some
awesome advice.
fantastic advice. Not just about model railroading, but any hobby, right? That's amazing.
I think the
And
difference with model railroading is I think the learning curve is really long. I mean, in any, whether it's music, sports, whatever, some people will ramp up more quickly, but generally not. And I think with model railroading, you look at all these guys and they put their photos up of their early layouts and they were pretty raw, when they were in their teens or in their 20s, and they've just been at it a long time.
yeah,
But you can't get better.
You feel like technology nowadays, though, has something to do with people being able to get better faster?
It could, because the YouTube videos are a prime example of how that could be. It's a double-edged sword, Mike, because technology is addictive, and
Right.
it's so easy to. I mean, you see this. You get on YouTube and you see this stupid German Shepherd playing with a cat, and next thing you know, 10 minutes has gone by, and they say, "Oh, if you like that, here's another one." The next thing you know, an hour has gone by, or you get on these, you get into model railroad forums, and you get into these pointless debates with total strangers. So that's the downside, is you can waste a lot of time. The upside is, you can go and see a YouTube tutorial that will really speed up the learning curve, or you can shoot an email off to a friend of yours. So it's a long answer. The answer, Mike, is yes, it can make you better faster, but you have to be careful that you don't get sucked into the side avenues.
Well, like Heath says, though, at Humanity Junction, he says, "Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it does make you faster, but you still have to go out and do it yourself. Just watching it doesn't make you any better. You have to still physically go and do it."
Right.
yeah, I think that's 100%. So I'm gonna be as subtle as a 15-pound hammer upside the head here. So when
Oh, boy.
when we talk about so let's say I want to enjoy the hobby more, right? And I'm going to push myself to get better. So what what are some of the things, as an average model railroader, what should I be looking for? What tips or things that I can do that could start taking me down that path to continuously improve, to always get better? So what should I do to start?
It takes an awareness of what the difference makers are, and I think that's where a lot of the confusion lies. Is the mechanical aspects of assembly are vital, but the culture of our hobby is that neatly assembling a station or a freight car and putting a uniform coat of paint is considered a 10 out of 10 on the rung, and it's not. And that's the first thing you have to understand. That's the easy part, because you have the guardrails. If you have a kit of a structure, you can't get too far off track. Once you master filling the gaps, neatly assembling it, eventually you will learn that. And in our hobby, they're saying that's the last step. If you've got the right number of window mullions, everything's dimensionally correct, okay, it's a perfect model. And that's where we get into trouble, because it's not, particularly when you get into scenery or layouts as a whole. So to answer your question, Andy, there has to be an understanding that, I'm just going to pick on who I think the two best modelers are out there, Tom Johnson and Mike Compolone.
Sure.
And they have some common elements. As a layout, looking at a layout as a whole, the composition is vital. to how good it looks. And composition has to do with the elements you pick, the size of them, their relative position, how you space them apart. The second element, which both Tom and Mike Confalone are masters at, is color treatment. And that is extremely complicated because you get into what color is that? What are the transitions between color? It's a whole ball of wax. And I'm guessing I probably lose 50% of my, I'm joking, 50% of my personal blog followers having me get this, Willie, shut the hell up on this. But you need to get out of the sandbox of model railroading. They've already heard it, but you're going to see you're just going to see this, your number of people watching this video drop in half in about 30 seconds.
Rate of abandonment.
The rate of abandonment. But you have to have a fundamental understanding of artistic principles to really become a master. Tom Johnson is a retired art teacher. And I'm not talking about classes on drawing or painting, but I'm talking about classes on visual literacy, color theory, composition. And you don't have to live in a big city to see these. And I would encourage people to go because by nature, art professors, the artsy-fartsy types are better speakers than Lance Mindheim or what you went to in school or your certification programs. They're great speakers. The classes fly by, but it's a long-winded way of saying if you want to move from being in the top 10% to the top 1%, the fastest way to do that is to immerse yourself in the art world. Start going to lectures. They're a lot of fun. Like in town, just roll into a museum, you tag along for a tour, and what they'll do is they will take a painting and they will break it into a grid, and they will explain why somebody like Vermeer or Hopper, why they put the elements where they did, the size of them, the coloring, the shape, and they'll do a lot of talking about color transitions, how they handle their brush strokes. Things like that apply. There's a one-to-one application to model railroading.
Sure.
Because what you run into go ahead.
I was going to ask, is it all right if I bring up a visual about basic composition, artistic composition while carrying on here? Would that be all right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just give me a hot second here. So one of the things that I was finding on the internet, right, was the Beginner's Guide to Composition, and keeping in mind of what Lance was saying here about, where do we put these elements within the space, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you can actually you could actually translate this guide to composition onto a horizontal plane on your layout and create the scene composition that way, right?
That's true. And I've read these tutorials and they're excellent, but I will say there's something about being there in person with the lecturer. I think it's going to be hard to pick it up by reading, and it's going to be a lot faster to be on a tour with somebody. But what you put up is exactly what I'm talking about and what they go through in a class. But for some reason, being one-to-one as opposed to reading it or even watching a video, you're going to learn a lot faster, and you have to give yourself time. That's an excellent example. What they would do in a class is they would put up a painting like that, and then they just break it into grids and talk about why it was set up that way.
Right,
and
what's
you have to
going
be
on
patient. It's not a situation where you go to one and you're going to understand it. I mean, just take your wife, take your kids if they have any interest at all. Just roll in, sit down like you're watching a movie, and don't stress about it, and just make it a habit. And then, over a year or so, you'll see an improvement in how you lay things out. Because what happens in model railroading is, particularly from a design standpoint, people are driven by fear. There is a fear of boredom. in that if they don't have a massive amount of stimulation in front of them, all this effort is going to result in something that they're bored with. And so they keep adding and adding and adding elements to the point where it doesn't look like what motivated them to come into the hobby in the first place. It doesn't look like the real thing.
That's a
And then
interesting take. Could
and then the other one is
go ahead. Go ahead. No, I was gonna. You go ahead. I'll listen. I'll be quiet.
Color is really complicated, and it's not just the color. It's the transition from one to another. You talk about getting better. Just take a basic asphalt street. When I built my last layout, I thought I had this system that looked great. And over time, I think, look back and said, well, it was okay, but it's certainly not great. Because if you look at an asphalt street, what makes them so hard to model is it's not gray, and it's not gray with exhaust stripe. There's probably 9 or 10 different colors there. And what makes it hard is they are very close to each other. So they're very similar in shades, and they transition from one to another. And that's not a skill that you will get in a year or two. And that's why Tom Johnson and Mike Confalone's work looks so good, is they are really masters at color and the transitions. And the first step is just understanding that that's what you're shooting for. And you have to be patient with yourself. It takes time to get there. So this is, it's kind of a long-winded way of saying is that if you want to move above average, you need to get out of the inbreeding of model railroading, where you get the same basic approach and mindset, and maybe look at the people whose work is worth 80 or 100 million dollars. I think if this guy's painting is worth 100 million dollars, maybe there's something he knows that I don't, that it's worth examining. It was kind of an interesting story, but go ahead.
No, tell the story. Yeah, that's why we're here.
So it has to do with brush strokes, which there is a one-to-one application of model railroading in terms of how you handle the color transitions on a weathered structure or a piece of rolling stock. And if you look at guys like Gary Christensen or Butch Eiler, and they're really masters at this.
Yeah,
they're so good.
So there was a seminar, and all these seminars are either like $5 or free, so it's not like you're looking at any money. But they were talking about the Dutch painter Vermeer, that's his painting behind me. So there was a big uproar that he only did 40 pictures in his life, and the National Gallery of Art thought they had 4 of them. So COVID hits, attendance is shut off, and so all the curators at the National Gallery are bored out of their minds. So what are we going to do to occupy ourselves? So they said, let's take these 4 Vermeers, and we're going to put them under all these scanning devices and really study them and see what we can find. And they found out that they came to the conclusion that one of the 4 was not his. And they published a paper on that. And all the young ones, cover your ears, but the shit hit the fan when this paper was published. Because they thought they had, I don't know what his paintings are worth, say 100 million each. Well, now the National Gallery says, we thought we had 4, but this one was not his. And the curator says, the reason you could tell is they zoomed in to like these 1 square inch areas, and they said, look at how he transitions from one color to the next. Just how masterful his color transition and color treatment is. If you look at the 3rd one, it's not as good, and it's not a question of him having a bad day. Somebody else did it. So that just kind of goes into the importance of dealing with color. It's not easy, but it's a lot of it's an interesting topic. So anyway, that was a very long ramble on some ways to get better. I would say that so color, you have to focus on the transitions between colors, get better and better at using more colors that are very close to one another. So if you're doing a street, as a beginning modeler, you're going to paint it gray. As you get better, maybe you'll have two tones. But if you look at, somebody like Tom Johnson and the concrete work on his grain elevators, there's probably 7, 8, 9 colors there. So as you get better, and those colors are very close to one another. So as you get better at adding additional color layers, and the work is going to look better.
So can I ask a follow-up question here? In regards to color, are you talking about like studying color theory, like looking at the color wheel, complementary, colors and, subtractive and additive type blending and that like? Is that what you're referring to?
That does help, and I've taken classes on that, and it was helpful. But I think that you can get there, Andy, just by really studying a photograph. I'm doing a book on scenery now, and one thing I was never happy with was the color of my grass. And so what I did is I just took a lot of prototype photos of these weedy grass lots, and what you will find is, I think you can self-train if you look at things with a critical eye, is with scenery products, a lot of the colors not a match for what the real world is, but as model railroaders, we just reach for that shaker. But usually, if you take a given manufacturer like Silflor, they may have 7 shades of green, 6 of which are not appropriate, but there is one in there that is appropriate. So, and it's a very narrow target. The color theory classes did help me in terms of, look at green and you say, okay, well, that's got more of a red tint, more of a yellow. It's very subtle, but a lot of model railroad grass is too much of a blue-green or too lime colored.
Yes.
Or just kind of, there's some odd colors, but let's just take a look, pick at Silflor. Their late summer is really the emerald. That's really the sweet spot of the emerald color that grass really is. So the color theory classes, they are worth taking to understand what you're looking at. And you can say, this product doesn't look real. And then you have to understand why it's maybe too mint or too blue-green. And if you study it, you can, you get a better feel for it.
Yeah.
So the color theory classes they're not a waste of time.
Yeah. So Tom Johnson says the one thing that I've learned to do is paint a lot of my scenery with artist oils. I guess I can call it 3D painting. I stain my grass with thinned oils. I dry brush over fallen leaves and so on.
And that gets to the point too, is that what Tom is saying, first of all, artist oils are very forgiving to work with. It's my favorite medium.
Yes.
But if you take a field, the typical model railroad approach was, okay, we got rid of the ground foam when we have static grass. But if you go get a Silflor medium green static grass and shake it over, it's going to look like a golf course or a public park. It's not going to look like what is behind you in that photograph. So you're looking at a lot of very subtle blends, and you have the thatch coming up beneath it. And Tom is alluding to that too, I think.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've just started doing on my layout is I call it weathering my scenery, to essentially change the shade or change the tone of the grass. I think one of the Tamiya colors, it's called field gray. It's a real warm gray, kind of gives that, I guess, that look of weeds and grass and in northern Wisconsin and upper Michigan. So I subscribe to that theory 100%. That's for sure.
That brings me to one of the other points that I wanted to make, just dovetailing on it. You gave me a great lead in, is it takes practice. And in any given scene, I never get that on the first try. So I always encourage people to practice on samples. So taking what you said, I'd take a bunch of 4-inch squares of foam, and then take what you said, and I'll just work with it. It may take 3 or 4 attempts to dial it in. So I'm always practicing on samples to dial it in. Then I move to the layout, because maybe I'm a slow learner, but it takes time, to get a sense for what the right texture, the right color is. And I don't want to ruin something on the layout.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a really good point to practice before you blast it onto the layout. I wish I would have done
And
that
it
with
does,
this road.
but I do that all the time. I mean, I was trying to improve the quality of my roads, and what you were saying is, I just had these piles of styrene. I just kept going over and over, and it's like, this didn't work, that didn't work, and then eventually it becomes faster and faster, and then you start dialing it in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
Mike.
at what point do you consider, like, say, one of your roads? At what point do you sit there and go, good enough? This is where I want it to be. This is what I, or is there a point where you're like, you say that one day and then you go back downstairs, or you go to your layout and you're like, yeah, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, but you have to cut yourself some slack. I mean, but oftentimes it's not one day. I mean, take an example of the roads. When I built my main layout in the basement 10 years ago, I thought, oh, this looks so great, which is never, any type of hubris is never good. It's going to bite you in the ass later. But
right.
over
Right.
time, it's more subtle, Mike, in that over maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 years, as you get better, you say, okay, that road that I did was my best effort at the time, but I think I'm going to take another crack at this. So, but that's always going to happen if you stay in the hobby and you're always trying to get better. What you do now is always going to be better than 5 years. What Tom Johnson does now is better than what he did 5 years ago. So, and I think that's a good thing. The point that it's totally subjective when you look at it and say, okay, I'm happy with that. But usually it's pretty obvious I'm not. Pretty obvious if I don't. Usually it's pretty obvious to me if I screw something up, I swing for the fences. I really screw it up.
Attaboy.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about a couple of topics here in theory. Would you mind if I brought up? We have some photos that you sent us, and maybe kind of break down some of these topics that we've talked about. Mike's shaking his head.
Sure.
No, let's not listen to him. Which one did you
No,
want me to bring
it's
up
just
first?
these pictures are so amazing.
Do you want to do the LAJ? Let's see here.
Let's do that. Let's do the LAJ, because that brings me to a point that you were just talking about.
I absolutely love this photo. So I'm gonna just
starting with the CF7.
Yeah, there's all that.
I love ugly locomotives. The ugliest locomotives are.
Let me see here. Should come up. Is it up?
Nope.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Can you guys see it now?
Look at that.
Okay, so we have Lance. Are you able to see that on your screen as well?
It looks like it's loading, but
okay, just give it a minute. Your internet may be taking just a minute to catch up. Okay, so let's talk about this picture here.
There's a couple things. To begin with, the foundation is the composition. If you don't have the composition right, you're screwed. You cannot go back, no matter how masterful a painter are. You cannot go back and do it. And I was taking a composition course down at the National Gallery, excellent teacher, and I stayed after class and I said, do you have a minute? I just want to show you what I'm working on. Can you give me some input? And he said, well, that's a different realm, but whatever. And then in 30 seconds, he goes, all right, you need to shift this. You need to move that. You need a splash of color here. You need to do this. And he just blew me away in terms of the improvement of the overall scene. So pulling this together, you do have to have an understanding of composition. You see the palms and the light post, the vertical elements add a lot of snap, because when you have a shelf, you got a parallel, you got a shelf and roads that are perpendicular and track down the middle. It's very grid-like. And the only way out of that trap is with the vertical plane. So that's where the palm and the pole comes in.
Yeah.
In terms of that unit, it was an enormous amount of work. And I spent hours and hours studying it, and it really goes to the subject of practice, in that I had all these 2-inch squares of plastic, and I just kept practicing over and over and over and eventually the technique that works best for the peeling paint, as you had mentioned, a Tamiya, which I love. That works great for a peel with tape. So I finally figured out that I could put a light wash of the Tamiya. You look at a stopwatch, and I don't even remember the time. I didn't write it down. You have like a couple minutes, and if you tap it with masking tape, it'll peel it just like the prototype. Other paints, they would just grip. They wouldn't do that. If you tap it too soon, too much paint comes off. So it goes back to the concept of practicing on swatches. So I didn't just spray it and then an hour later it looked like it. It was like a month of practice.
Wow. And that was just for the engine.
Yeah, but I love those things. I mean, I was going to take as much time as I wanted to, as much time as that took. I love ugly locomotives and the LAJ. So it was.
I mean, this is a very iconic. Like when you think of model railroading, this specific CF7 in the LAJ, this is an icon that it's burned into my brain, seeing this growing, or actually not growing up, but recently. And yeah, it's fantastic model.
One of the other points I put on the list was, and this costs nothing, is a commitment to neatness. And it sounds judgmental, but it's not, because over time you develop an eye for something that's off. In terms of, if it's a structure, you want to make sure there's no globs of glue on it. You want to make sure those palms are vertical. That there's just no stray pieces of scenery, no gaps in the road. If you have 2 pieces of styrene, you want to make sure that they're seamless. It costs nothing, but if you are really fanatical about neatness, it really pays off in terms of the quality of your work. And you can take a quick run at it initially, but over time, then you hit the point of diminishing returns. It takes more of a practice eye and more practice to do that. But neatness really does matter. You don't want ballast stuck to the rail, gloves of solder on the rail, things like that will show up in photographs.
So is that a fair comment to make, that almost like if you were to take a photograph of it, what would stand out, what would kind of catch your eye and take away from the scene, those imperfections, that big glue glob or the solder glob or gobs of ballast, in the web of the rail. Those are the things that you need to. Go ahead.
It's pretty common that I'll take a picture and I've got to say, all right, I need to put the camera down and spend a day fixing these things because I didn't notice them. But the camera will really help you with that. Yeah,
it's kind of like a coach watching game film, right, on the game before, to see how their team can get better, right? I mean,
it's true, and it costs nothing. There is no cost at all in terms of that. Yeah. It's just a practiced eye.
Yeah.
So, Lance, we do have a couple of questions from the section crew here. So, Split Rock asks, the palm trees, how are those made?
It's not that hard, but you have to have a commitment to do it. And I'm going to shame people in doing that, because as you guys are shaking because I'll tell you what's going to do. I'm going to explain to you how to do it. And by tomorrow morning, everybody's going to say, screw it. I'm going to buy something that doesn't look that good. I'm going to drop it $30. But while you are saying that, there is some 15-year-old high school girl that is using the same technique and cranking this stuff out. So no shame. But I got somebody, Alex Marchand gave me the artwork. I cut them on Oracal peel and stick vinyl on a craft cutter. So you go to Michael's, you get craft cutter, you dial it up, you put the Oracal sheets in it. 3 minutes, you get 30 fronds, and they're much finer than you would get through injection molding. The trunks are just 1/4-inch tube. I put them in a drill chuck, put a sharp file, spun it around to put the serrations in it. So that's how I did that. Put a blob of black clay and put the fronds. And I've got an article in Model Railroad. It should come out at some point, but that's how I did it. And so for all you guys that are going to blow this off tomorrow, just think about the 15-year-old girls that are just cranking out stuff 50 times harder than this while you're bitching and moaning that you can't do
it. Pull out the hobby knife. Let's go.
Right? Yeah, right.
So there's a couple other ones here. Let me see here. It says question. Otter Creek in Rio Grande says, how much of what you do in a scene is specifically designed for photography versus the perspective of the operator on the layout? Kind of tying back to the couple of points we just made.
100% on photography.
100% on photography.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
But that's what drew us to the hobby, was being a rail fan. I think almost everybody, if you go back, it's being a rail fan. And when you stand, you cannot capture the way your models look through the naked eye. It's just impossible because, I mean, maybe if you slam your head down on the layout and close one eye and squint, you'll get close, but you're too high up. It's just more of the drone look. The only way to capture something like this scene is through the lens, which to me is the fun part. I mean, it brings you back to what drew us to the hobby in the first place, which was the rail fanning.
Right.
I don't think there's any of us that hasn't, like when we were even growing up and stuff like that, hadn't gone and gotten ourselves down on, gotten us to try to be as small as we possibly could watching the train go past on a layout. You know, you know, we've always, I think a lot of modelers have kind of had that perspective thought in their head, but never really executed it like when they're building their layouts, you know? So it's because I can remember doing that when I was growing up, trying to be, layouts would be like you're over the top of them, but then I'd get a chair and I'd sit down as close to the top of the layout deck as I possibly could in order to get the perspective of trying to be standing on the, you know, standing trackside rather than being way up over the top, right?
It was a funny story. It was like 2 or 3 years ago, Mike, I'm looking at some picture and I see this overall shot of a roundhouse. I'm like, this guy is the most gifted modeler I've ever seen. Where has he been? I mean, I've never heard of this guy. It's just amazing. And I go, wait a minute. That's a drone of the prototype. That's not a model. Because the point was we're so used to that perspective that it kind of throws us.
Oh man, that's awesome. So there's another question Heath from Humanity Junction had here. Let me just circle back to it. It says, so how do you plan for good composition on multi-deck layouts? Do you have which deck is a priority? Is it possible to make an artist multi-deck layout? So this is
purely opinion, but you should never ask my opinion if you don't want the answer. I am not.
Can I ask for your opinion?
yes, I'm absolutely not a proponent of multi-deck layouts because unless you are an operator, Bill Darnaby and Tony Custer are good friends of mine. The reason they have a multi-deck layout is their passion is the chess game of threading trains by each other while they cover long distances. They have a specific purpose in mind. And I hear it over and over again with my design clients, like, oh, I just want to multi-deck it. Well, there's an ideal viewing height for a layout. As soon as you go to multi-deck, now you have two decks, neither of which is at that viewing height. You've got construction complexities. There's a lot of work getting the necessary deck separation. I'm just not, unless you are a timetable train order operator that really wants the thrill of going long distance, I'm not a proponent of multi-deck layouts.
And to tie into that comment, Tom Johnson says my layout is 60 inches high, so the view for me is close to real life. So I mean, 60 inches, that's
pretty
I'd have to
up
get on
there.
a step stool that's 5 foot. Wow. That's a good
So
point.
Tom, I think the invitation to visit your layout got lost in the mail. I'm checking every day.
Boomer says his is at 58 inches high. So you're starting to see.
Measured mine. I just measured mine. My layout deck is 55 and a half.
I think mine are 55 and a half too. It's the thing that you run into is I think it is a little bit nicer to have them higher, but I personally find it a little more difficult to work on while you're building them. So I find myself always grabbing for the step stool to get it up and over, when I'm laying track. So there's two considerations. I think that the higher may look better once you get it done. But I think armpit level to me personally, and this is subjective, is a little bit easier to work on.
Yeah, certainly. So there's a couple of other pictures, Lance, that you sent along. I think there was one of looks like a winter scene or a fall scene, and then it looks like one of the downtown spur, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see here. So is this your N scale layout?
That was the old Monon layout, which was probably the first time I felt like I did a good job modeling it. And if there's any Monon people out there, this was a very iconic scene in southern Indiana. It's in a lot of photos. Guy by the name of Bennett, shot a lot of these. And the point was, a lot of people said this scene is 12 feet long, and it's like I never would have had the discipline to have 12 feet with nothing in it. And I'm like, well, gee whiz, I never even got the damn thing finished anyway. So everybody's so worried about getting all this stuff in there. You're just adding more things you're not going to build anyway. So I bit off way too much of this layout. It had a lot of good qualities, but the thing I learned is that it was just too much for me in terms of size. But I really did like that scene. I never regretted
it's beautiful.
devoting that much space to it.
And if anybody's ever driven or been through that part of Indiana or even Illinois or Wisconsin, Iowa, any of the grain states, Minnesota, the mid to late fall, that's what it looks like. I mean, there's nothing there. It's everything's gone. It's just there's no greenery, there's no color. It's beige, tan, gray, brown. It's dead.
And it gives you, and what you do there, it does give you an opportunity, depending on the paint of your prototype, to get an enormous amount of snap and contrast. Because, if you have any prototype got any orange or red in it, and their locomotives, like if that had been a Santa Fe or something with that background, you get a really nice contrast between the muted tones and then the reds of the locomotives.
And that's That's
Chicago
another.
Northwestern would be a great one for
Oh yeah.
it's C&W with the yellow and the green. You know, that would have been fantastic
Yeah.
through something like that.
So this is one of those I guess fundamentals of composition, and color, right? So creating that contrast between the positive and negative space, right? So that's, for example, having the trains stand apart from the rest of the scene, is another one of those fundamental things that can really make things pop. Is that correct, Lance?
That's true. And I think a big part of that, guys, is you have to have a leap of faith that you're not going to be bored. I mean, I think that's really, I think where people get into
Mhm.
composition problem, it all comes down to this fear of boredom, that they may understand technically that this scene is going to look better, but they're just so afraid that they're not going to enjoy the layout. And I think that's really the basis for why people don't spread things out more. Or they have this need for sensory overload where they just need so many elements in a given scene.
Hmm. So Santa Ana Industrial Lead Model Railroad's asking, what were the dimensions of this scene roughly?
I would say 2 feet by 12 in N scale.
Wow.
Oh, that's an
So from where
eternity
the
in N
camera
scale.
is, it's about
Yeah.
12 feet. It's about 2.5 feet left to right.
That's fantastic. Let's see here. And then you had one more picture that we're gonna share with the group here. This is really cool. Just this picture with the canal running right down the middle.
That's so cool.
It's amazing.
You made an interesting point. You were talking about Indiana, Wisconsin, and I'm from Indiana, so I can say this. And no offense to the fine residents of all these states, but if you go from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Pennsylvania to Maryland, all the way up to Maine, there's a lot of it looks very similar. And
Oh,
no offense, no offense, but a lot of it does.
None taken.
Having lived in those areas.
I just drove back. I just drove back from Columbus, Ohio, like 2 weekends ago, and I'm like sitting there going, "This could be anywhere Wisconsin, and we're in Ohio. Everything looks the same, you know. It was crazy, except for the way they make their roads a little bit. But other than that, it was for the most part the scenery was the same, you know."
And that was one of the reasons I wanted to model Florida, just to do something different. I mean, it's really a great railfan environment. There's so much going on, color, texture, culture, but it was just a chance, having spent my whole life in those scenes we're talking about. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but just to do something different. So
Sure.
So, have you ever thought about maybe trying going down into the Southwest and stuff like that, doing any modeling from down in that neck of the woods? Because I've heard that's really kind of tough to do.
I would love to do that. And if anybody's listening that has some extra cash in their checkbook and want me to build one of those, I would love to do it. But at this point, I've got 4 layouts in my
sponsored.
house.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to take I'd love to take a Southwest layout. This scene here is funny that go ahead.
We're getting a lot of questions about the choices of locale. So you went into the Indiana choice, right? So a lot of people are asking, why Miami?
Just because it was different, I think. A lot of the people watching this weren't even born. I love that show, Miami Vice, and just the whole vibe and the culture. Yep. And it's just like they call it Miami, the northernmost city in South America. The rail fanning is just off the top, and they still do things like they did in the 50s down there. So it was just a chance to do something different with, just a different canvas.
Yeah. So, and I apologize for interrupting there, but why don't you take us through this scene as well?
This is based on, there is an industrial park. I know my buddy Toga Boer is listening in on this, or he said he was, but there's an East Rail Industrial Park. But this, I did not really, this is more pro freelance. One of the signature features of Miami, particularly around the airport, is the canals. So I just wanted to put a canal in there, kind of as a regional stamp saying this is Miami. And then it's funny, in talking to Tolga, all of a sudden we stumbled on these pictures, which I had not seen before, which are almost an exact replica of this canal. He just did a gas log for me. I haven't posted yet showing that. But this was my first foray into Miami, and it was in my shop, like a 10 by 10 L. It was very successful in terms of the enjoyment that it provided, but the shop was not the greatest environment, and I wanted to try something bigger. And so I sold the layout. And then about 5 years later, I'm like, why did I do that? And then, so I was feeling sorry for, I mean, this went on for like 5-10 years. And so it had been sold several times. And I was like, I'm so tempted to contact, I could track it down, drive out to Indiana and get it. I said, you know what, it's just gonna be easier and cheaper to build a copy. So it's insane, but I'm building it I'm rebuilding it downstairs, and this is what I'm working on right now. This scene here, I'm rebuilding it on a new layout.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I can't imagine what it's going to look like on the redo. It's
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, according to his own theory, it should be better, right?
It should be better. We'll have to hold him to that.
Yeah, we got to hold you to your own theory, because if this is the prototype, or the prototype scene, the next scene of the same thing should be better, right?
Yeah.
It should be, and I'll tell you what I'm focusing on, because it brings up what we had talked about, is that if you really study vegetation carefully, and it took me a while to figure this out, you're really looking at more of an emerald color. And if you look at the vegetation on the sides of this canal, there's a lot of blue-green, a lot of mint, a lot of ochres. The colors are just off a little bit. So that's one of the areas of emphasis on the redo, is getting the color for the vegetation on the banks a little more accurate. So that's one of the things I'm working on.
Will you go out
and then if you look at some of the,
of that? Will you
yeah, but we
take
can all do that. All you have
photographs
to do is walk. Right, Tolga is down there. I mean, he just sent me some yesterday, but it's a lot of this. You can either get it from Google Street View or just walk out your backyard and take the pictures and take a look at them. And then also, just if you look at the lower left quadrant, you see the little grass tufts from Soflor. That's another example that those colors are really not. Yeah, right there, that one. Those are used a lot. I used a lot. They come in that color. They come in a mint and a brown. It's not very realistic, really, when you think about it. And there's a couple guys on YouTube, Luke Towan, explain how to make your own. I would not make my own if they made them in the color I need, but Soflor has the exact match, so I just take their static grass, their late summer, and make my own tufts to get a little bit closer. But that's the example of, no matter how long you're in the hobby, you see something that could be improved. The vegetation is not an accurate green. Those tufts, that doesn't really exist in the real world. So those are just some of the small things to work on. I don't beat myself up about it. I mean, that was the best I could do at the time, but it's just an example.
Yeah, you're progressing, learning.
Right.
I just love the static grass here along the banks of the canal, and how it's not just uniform, like the mower came by and just cut it, all at one level. There's different heights and textures, and it's really cool how you did that.
The more heights and textures you can work in, the better it's going to look. Particularly when you get by nature, humans like order. So a lawn or a golf course or a park is going to be much easier to model because everything is uniform. As soon as you get off that into an industrial park or Mother Nature, then all of a sudden it gets much more complex. And what you just explained is, an area to focus on: more color, more texture.
Yeah, fantastic.
So how did you get the ripple effects in your water to look like it looks like we're looking at something that's got like a 5-mile-an-hour wind coming across that water like that, just enough of a ripple through there to make it not smooth. How do you do your water?
It's just gloss medium applied with vertical stabs with a brush. So I detailed the canal bottom. In this case, I was going to have it see-through, so I used Envirotex. So I detailed the bottom. The Envirotex is maybe an 1/8 of an inch thick, not very thick. And at that point, it's too mirror-like. So once the Envirotex is set, Mike, then you just get your Mod Podge gloss medium, dip a brush in it, and using vertical strokes, get the ripples. You don't want them to look like rapids or something you would see out in the bay,
Right.
or the
Right.
Lake Michigan. So you kind of have to just keep an eye on it, make sure there's no air bubbles, and that's how it was pretty simple to get that look.
Yeah, that looks really, really good.
And then I did have Lance a question from Scott Thornton, asking, interested on your thoughts on modeling trackside junk and garbage. Are so many layouts look too clean?
I think it's a very important element because you're adding artistically, and this gets back into the composition thing. Done correctly, it gives a sense of visual contrast and snap to a scene. And it's there, so you're just modeling what's there. You have to model railroaders are a really twisted bunch. They're not normal. And
you heard it here
I preface
first.
that by saying I'm one of those. But I'll put myself as I'm just prefacing that as the way to get the trash right is to take a picture and copy it. In other words, take a look at where the color of the trash, mostly it's white, where the wind blows it, how it piles up, so it doesn't look contrived. So I think it's an important element, and let photos be your guide in terms of where the wind dumps it.
Yeah, that looks really great. It's a good comment.
I just use that white tissue paper that, the tissue paper you get to wrap Christmas presents in, the white paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tone it down a little bit with a little bit of very dilute India ink, let it dry, and then just cut it in squares and glue it down.
Yeah, good stuff. So I think I'm looking through the program this evening, and we talked about, I think, almost all of them that were on the list tonight. But there was one that I think or maybe one or two that we missed, but I think they're very closely tied together. And it was talking about the actual thickness of the prototypical parts. And if you could take us through that.
This will make a really big. Yeah, I think this is really important in terms of the appearance of a model, because a lot of these elements that we're modeling we see every day, and subconsciously we know what they're supposed to look like. The challenge is that a lot of elements are really pretty thin, and because of limits in manufacturing, it's very difficult for a manufacturer to make things that thin. So you have to be aware of how visually jarring it is if a handrail is 2 inches in diameter and you plop in something that's a scale 4 or 5 inches, it's going to stand out. Window mullions are big offenders also. There's a couple approaches you can take. Number one, try to find the appropriate part, whether it's through Grant Line or one of the other vendors. If it's not available, paint it a dark color. For example, a big offender would be safety rails going up a silo. The vertical ladders with the safety cages. In a real world, for safety reasons, they're painted yellow, but because they are so grossly oversized as parts, if you paint them yellow, it's just going to accentuate the fact that it's too thick. So I would deviate from the prototype and paint it, a more subdued color. But just having an awareness of, 1 inch in HO is 11 thousandths, just being aware of it as you work, as you're putting models together. If something's supposed to be 2 inches, or a post is supposed to be 2 inches and your model part is 6 inches, it's going to look off.
Right. One of the in where I model, North Wisconsin pulpwood, right? It's like they just cut down redwood trees and put them in a gondola or something. The size of the logs, can even, that from scale perspective are just way too big for what you would normally see in a pulpwood load around here. They're only about 4 or 5 inches, maybe at the most 8 inches in diameter, but you got these giant logs, in there that can really distract the scene.
And that's really a great example. And a lot of that just becomes just being aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Randy Relander says, theater tricks. People don't focus on dark colors. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So a lot of times, you get these kits from Walthers that are, pretty nice models, and the windows are cast in and they're oversized. There's not enough time in the day to, auger all those out and replace them with Tichy or Grant line. So as he just mentioned, don't paint them yellow or white. Paint them a dark gray or a burnt umber, and it'll downplay the fact that that they're oversized. As he said, theater trick.
Yeah, good. So there's a handful more of questions, Lance, that I wanted to get out in front of you. Some are on topic, some are not, but I think they're interesting ones that nothing too harsh. But like, for example, Humanity Junction asks, what is your favorite scale to model and why?
S scale.
Nope.
I learned this the hard way, and it's an easy one. HO because of parts availability.
Yeah.
So not S scale.
Yeah. After a while, it becomes it's exciting at first, but HO is 87% of the hobby, and just being lazy. There's just financially, there's more incentive for the manufacturers to give a broader array of parts.
Yeah. Chris Bell has one here. It says, what was your inspiration to go to a shelf style technique?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't even know. That's like when you go to your teenage son and go, what were you thinking when you did that? And they say, I don't know.
I was young and I needed money.
Yeah, it makes a better use of space and human limitations in terms of how far we can reach. Railroads tend to be linear. You only want a train to go through a scene once. So, Alan McClellan, Tony McCusker, I mean, they were the pioneers in that. And I think that's really got me started just, back in the 70s reading Alan McClellan's articles.
The VNO.
I've got one to piggyback on top of that question.
Okay.
What is your ideal depth of a shelf layout?
That's a great question, because I think we tend to panic. I know I do, and go too thick. I would say 18 inches. I've got a couple of layout downstairs where I panicked. I made it 22 or 24, and it's like I didn't need that. Now it's just more.
So I must be insane, man. See, I must be insane. I model S scale, and I'm doing mine as 11.5, basically 12 inches deep.
If it gets the job done, that's all it takes. What Bill Darnaby said, enough to get the job done and not an inch more, is what he says.
Oh, there you go. I like that line.
So Roger Moses here, another one from the section crew, says, how do you keep the passion for your own layout alive while spending so many hours building layouts for others?
That's a great question. I get it all the time. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just ever, I never ever get tired of it. And it goes back to the DNA. I mean, it's just a fascinating subject. Building things with my hands. Um, I can work on a layout all day. Sometimes I work my stuff in side by side with it, and I just, I just never get tired of it.
Ooh, I got one to piggyback onto that one though.
And except, and I will, I only take a break for one thing, and you guys have to promise not to comment on this, is when I need a break to play with my flight trainer, my Flight Radar 24. So no comments from you, Tom Johnson, or anybody else. But I will take a break with the Flight Radar 24. I did go back. So we'll leave
I don't
know
what you're talking about. I've never heard of it.
So there was some. Let's just let the section crew and everyone listening at home. Let's let them in on the secret here. So okay. I'm the minority here. So of the folks on the panel, 2 out of the 3 people here have what is called the Flight Radar 24 app on their phone.
Yep. Absolutely.
And you guys, what is it that you do with Flight Radar 24?
That's none of your damn business.
Yeah, you don't need to know that. That's a need to know basis. Cradle loud.
That was the best answer I could have hoped for.
It's exactly. It's the true answer is too embarrassing. It's what Mike said. Is you're sitting there doing something productive. A plane goes over. You stop what you're doing. You go into the flight radar and go, what plane is that? Where is it coming from? Where is it going? How fast is it
moving? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Tolga East Coast says it goes hand in hand with this to spot planes for FR-24. So who all here? I want to see a show of hands here in the section crew this evening. Who uses FR-24? I want to see that while we continue to talk here about Boomer's questions. So throw your hand up in the chat. I see Tom Johnson says Flight Radar 24 is awesome.
Yeah.
Tolga East Coast looks like he's a user as well. There's a couple.
I found it when my son was going on a trip to New York one time, and I just wanted to make sure. I was just like, I wonder if there's anything like that, and I just wanted to follow and track his flight, and that was it for some overbearing parent reason or whatever. And and I was just like, oh, this is cool, but.
Yeah, so this is funny.
Downloading Flight Radar.
so there's a couple people that are downloading it right now. But let's get back to the railroad topic just for the time being, and then we'll catch up on Flight Radar 24.
We can have another session for that.
Yeah. So Boomer Diorama River Road asks, does Lance know much about Ian Rice?
I'm familiar with Ian's work, and yes, I'm familiar with his plans. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious if there was any connection with the shelf or the modest or the, I guess the diorama type influence there. But yes.
No, but I think he had an enormous impact on the hobby in terms of bringing people in and just showing them a new way to enjoy the hobby.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. There was one other one here that I wanted to bring up. I think it was Christian Javier says, a lot of short lines I'm interested in seem incompatible with shelf layout designs. Yards built in Ys, industry set far back from the branch. How do you model these things believably on shelves?
Ooh, that's a good question.
This is a good question.
It is because, I've recently discovered perfect example of that up in Baltimore, which is Trade Point Railway. You have to it's not an easy thing to accomplish. I know exactly what he's asking because I thought about it with this. I'm not going to model that trade point, but it'd make a great prototype, and it has all the problems that Christian mentioned. you have to freelance it in a way that doesn't look like you're cherry picking. And that's very subjective in terms of how you do that. A lot has to go. If something can't be modeled, you have to set it to the cutting room floor. Ys don't really work well for model railroads, so that to answer your question, you have to pick individual scenes and somehow combine them in a way that's plausible, which is not. It can be done, but it's not easy. I know Christian, he's a friend of mine. I mean, if you're Christian, just if you shoot me a note next week and show me what's on your mind, I can, I'll take a look at it for you. I know exactly what he's saying, but you have to break it into sections and kind of reconfigure it, but do it in a way that's plausible. And doing that's not easy.
Yeah, certainly.
So is there something in your model railroad career that you haven't done yet, model wise, that you'd really like to take a stab at?
Yeah.
Well, we mentioned doing a Southwest layout before. You know, like, is there something say
I'm gonna charge you.
Like Tehachapi Loop or something, or like something like some kind of a
I would say
thing.
Maybe Malabar Yard in LA. I mean, I love Los Angeles and the themes there. I could probably pick 3 or 4 LA based themes. So to answer your question, I'm pretty much, know it, own it, be it, know yourself. I like the switching layouts and the short lines, but there's a lot in Los Angeles.
What about the channel? Would the channel be a big enough? Because the trains would really be secondary on that, right? You'd be more modeling the cityscape above it, wouldn't you? If you're trying to model the channel.
What's the
I think
channel?
that's the channel where the part of in Los Angeles where the trains are.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's what they call. I've always called it the channel. I don't know what their actual name for it is.
No, I know what you're referring to. Yeah, I just studied that. Certain elements don't lend themselves that well to being modeled, and sometimes you look at something and say that's really cool, but maybe it's not. To answer your question directly, I would skip it. I would say that that's something I'd like to say and look at. It's great, but I would just say I don't think it's really trying to. You'd have to cut too many corners to model.
Could you do it something if you wanted to model like that, something like that? Could you do it as if you were coming out of, say, staging, and that like maybe make like a 1 foot section of it, and where you're coming out of the scene, you're coming out of the one scene into the end portion of it, where you're coming back into scenery?
You bring up a really good question, and the analogy is the film industry, where you take a producer, director, that they've got 4 hours of really great material, just fantastic. The reality is nobody's going to watch a 4-hour movie. So you have to make difficult decisions and say something has to go. And, in Miami, Togo's very aware of this. There's a lift bridge over the Miami River. I wanted to model it, just never, it just won't fit. So sometimes you have to sacrifice something for the whole and set it to the cutting room floor. And then the resulting will just look better. But that's where people get in trouble, Mike, is they say, I got all these cool elements. I don't want to let any of them go. It happens all the time. It's the biggest battle I fight with my design clients. I've got 6 elements. I love them all. I'm not going to let any of them go. And I said, that's fine. The layout's going to look like shit. You're trying to do too much.
Yeah, I mean,
Alameda Corridor. Somebody said Alameda Corridor.
That would drive me crazy. I'm getting old. That God, that would have driven me crazy. Thank you, Alameda Corridor.
Santa Ana Industrial Lead with the save there, the Alameda Corridor.
Yep.
Yeah, we were just
That is exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah.
well, there's a right off of Alameda. There's Ken and I are always corresponding. There's this really great scene. It's like somebody should model that. Neither one of us have, but he knows what I'm talking about. There's some really cool stuff there.
Yeah. Good deal. There's just tons of questions coming in, Lance. Are you good to answer a few more?
Yeah, why don't we go another 10 minutes and then we'll just catch the rest of them next time.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. So the one that let's see here. I think Derek Alexander asked, in HO scale, is there an ideal distance between industries? It's kind of a
No,
loaded
because it depends
question.
on the prototype. I mean, in certain areas like Miami, they're right next to each other.
Yeah.
Where you get into trouble is how many towns you have on a layout. If you've got and this is why I like modeling industrial areas, because you're only modeling one place. It's so much easier to model one location than the journey from town A to B to C, because this is not exactly what he's asking, but if you get your towns too close together, then plausibility suffers. I'm not doing a very good job of answering. It's kind of a gut issue, and this is where the composition classes really come into play. But what I would say is I do a lot of work with mock-ups. I know Tom Johnson does this too, as you build, and Ken does also when he was in the layout he's building now, is just rough out some boxes and move them back and forth until you're satisfied with the spacing between them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a field test.
Yeah, the shelf that I have here, it's, what would you say, Mike? It's about 12 feet long.
Yeah, about 12 feet long, maybe about 14 inches deep, somewhere in there.
Yeah, this one's 12 to 14 inches deep.
Yep.
There's just one industry on it, and it's not, essentially it's a backwoods lumber mill, right? So it's very small. And then the distance between that and my next industry, or series of industries, is going to be 30 feet away. So, that's how I'm spreading them out, keeping it small, keeping it basic.
And it can be it's almost impossible to tell on paper. And I think people get too drawn to lines on paper when that's never going to give you the information. Whereas if you build the bench work, get your 16 to 18 inch shelf up, do a mock-up of the structures, the boxes, lay them there, and just let them sit there for a few weeks and let it settle in terms of how you think it's looking, and then adjust them as necessary. But there is a natural tendency, particularly from those new to the hobby, is to put too many things and too many elements too close together. So just be wary of that trap.
Like Tom Johnson was just saying about the one town layouts and everything. My layout, personally, my Farland terminal is the fictional layout. I have one town and two customers in that one town. But what I'm doing is I'm using a river scene to separate basically the two halves of the layout. One end is the interchange with one customer at a very far away, like 10, 12 feet away from the interchange. Then I have a river scene, and then you flow from the river scene, you go into my town. Because I model an S scale, so my length of run, even though the wall is 30 feet long that my shelf is on, you start putting these elements into it, that 30 feet gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah. And the one thing that comes back to all this too is that, all of this is subjective, and I'm just one person. I just want to remind what I said at the beginning is that for the most part, we are alone by ourselves with the layout room. Nobody really cares. These are just guidelines to think about. If you're happy and you wanted to do it another way, just do what makes you happy, because you're the only one that's going to see it. I mean, you don't have to, there's no cash prize or court that's going to be looking at these. These are just some ideas to think about if you want just some ideas that might increase your enjoyment, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. And they're I mean, they're really good. And, I can say from myself, I've started, learning about art. A while
Mhm.
back, I think when we had Boomer dioramas on, it was one of the concepts that he brought up as well. And um, you have to, really pay attention to things like composition, color, and this the the layout that you see behind me. It's my third or fourth rendition, and each one that I've worked on progressively get better. This is not going to the one that's behind me is not going to be my best work yet, but it's getting there, right? And I'm really, really enjoying the process of learning about composition, learning about color, um, learning about how to understand scale of things like thickness of power poles, thickness of logs, thickness, of these. It's just unbelievable how we can overlook those details that can totally blow up a scene. And I think
But
it's
on the other hand, Andy, you want to do your best layout the day before you die, right? You always want to be getting better. I mean,
right. Yeah.
because
Exactly.
it's, I mean,
Exactly.
how depressing would it be to know that you'd maxed out and you have another 30 years to live? That would be depressing. So
Right.
it's enjoy the ride. It's,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's good stuff. So um what we'll do here, Lance, is I'll do some admin. We're gonna do some admin stuff here, and then we'll tie down for tonight. But we'll pass it to Mike, and then we'll pass it to you for the final words.
Oh
Just
boy.
yeah, this is the awkward ending part of the show that we always do. But I do want to thank everyone in the section crew this evening. We had upwards of 145 people here in the chat tonight. Thank you again. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go and do that. It's a great way to support us. We also, you can support the podcast. We're out on Patreon as well. Second Section Podcast on Patreon. And we have an option to support for $5 a month. You get some cool stuff and some behind the scenes footage of what we're doing here in the second section. And then if you want to be part of the section crew at no additional cost, we are out on Facebook as well. So come join the second section podcast out on Facebook. The only cost of admission is you have to answer the 3 questions at the administration. The admins will not accept your um, will not accept your request to get in. But we have a great group of modelers there, asking questions, sharing information, and just enjoying the camaraderie of everyone that's been involved with this podcast. So,
That's
I
been a
do,
great source of like
yeah,
all sorts of different things. If you
yeah.
got a
So like.
question, guys are not going to be shy about
And
answering.
yeah, exactly. Like tonight, we had Ralph Ranzetti. Just to give you guys an example, we had Ralph Ranzetti ask about what primer are you guys all using. So make sure that you go out there, check in, because he's doing some crowdsourcing for an article that he's writing for RMC. So make sure you head out there, answer that question. It's pinned to the top. It's fun, fun group of guys and gals, and it's just been a real good experience for everyone. So, Lance, we're going to kick it over to Mike for a final comment, and then we'll kick it over to you. Um, Mike, what did you think of the presentation this evening, um, and all the comments from the section crew?
Well, first I'd like to say thanks for coming on, Lance. Been
oh, sure.
a big admirer of your work for years, and I tell you what, there's you gave me a lot to think about when I go and start looking at how I'm going to compose scenes on my layout. And I mean, between you and Tom Johnson and Boomer, and I've almost got information overload where I don't know how I'm gonna process all of this stuff. But the thing is like out of all the things I think we discussed today, I think the most poignant one was that you just got to go do it, right? I guess the underlying theme is you don't think about it, go do it. And if it doesn't look good, if it's, to coin a phrase, looks like crap, well, then do it again. And eventually you're going to start getting really, really good at what you're doing, and to not be afraid to make your mistakes, and you're always going to improve. Every time you make a mistake, you're going to make the next one's going to be better and better and better. And it was, there's just so many things. I could go on for another hour, but I mean, it's been a pleasure listening to you discuss this stuff. And I hope you come back on again, because I tell you what, there's so much more we got to talk about.
We should.
I'm happy to do it. So
we'll have to invite all your friends on too, right? Because if it's as good with just you here, and as entertaining as it was, I've heard some stories about when you and your friends get together, how things.
Yeah, yeah, we've heard a couple stories already.
Yeah,
you want to keep this G-rated.
That's okay.
I have a sheet here. I have a tip sheet, and I said on here, be professional. Do not use profanity once.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
But that's the problem with this being live. That's the problem with this being live.
But I think that there's a real element, using, just being yourself, and that's what this show is all about, right? We come on, we just talk like we were in the hobby shop or hanging out at a meet or an RPM or something like that. So you fit right in, Lance, that's for sure. But I did want to, just as a final teaser or a final thought to impart upon our audience that's out there this evening. Any final words of wisdom, because this episode's been chock full of them, before we go ahead and sign off for tonight?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Mike said, is that it's really a hobby of participation. And, some people, it's fine to say you're just a fan of the hobby and just admit it and say if you just want to be a fan. But if you're not happy with that, it really is just get a plank, put it on the wall, start building something. Just do something.
Yeah.
That would be my parting thought.
I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. And I just want to say, Lance, thank you for your time this evening, and sharing all of those wonderful bits of advice, not only just to be in model railroading, but to progress and get better, and sharing your work with us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Happy to come on again if you want me.
Yeah, so make sure you check out Lance at his websites there, modelrailroadbooks.com. He's also out there at lancemindheim.com. And then you can, if you're looking to get a layout built design from Lance, check him out at www.shelflayouts.com. On behalf of myself, Lance, and Mike, and the whole section crew this evening, thank you for tuning in, and we'll check in with you guys in 2 weeks. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Night.
All right. Good night. Thanks, guys. Bye.